Então, pode ser? Então, gente, boa tarde. Boa tarde para quem está assistindo também online. A gente está, bom, estou muito feliz do NEX estar trazendo, né, a professora Susanna Paasonen para fazer essa palestra, Exoticism and Cosmopolitanism, The Case of Brynner. A gente, enfim, Susanna, thank you very much. A palestra vai ser em inglês, mas aí depois nas perguntas a gente pode, enfim, para quem não se sente confortável de fazer alguma pergunta direto em inglês também pode ser, mas eu posso ajudar na tradução. A professora Susanna, ela é professora da Universidade de Turku, na Finlândia, é especializada em estudos de mídia, pesquisa de internet, afeto e pornografia, e também tem esse trabalho, assim, quase que, enfim, bastante intenso sobre a figura do Brynner, né? I'm seeing that it's quite an obsession.
I could understand
you
that
could,
much. Intensiva, yes.
Lidera o grupo de pesquisa estratégica Intimacy and Data-Driven Culture, que foi de 2019 a 2025, pensando questões de vulnerabilidade, formas de intimidade na cultura de dados, e é uma pioneira na pesquisa do estudo de pornografia e afeto, né, principalmente a partir do livro Carnal Resonance, Affect and Online Pornography, e, além disso, é consultora, enfim, de diversas agências. Bom, Susanna, thank you very much for giving this speech for us. The floor is all yours. I'm not going to translate, not going to even try to attempt to translate, but anything, I think it's going to be fine. Well, I'm going to sit there. The floor is all yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mariana, and thank you for coming. I sort of offered myself to do this talk, so thank you for having me. So, Brynner, you might be familiar with, you might not be familiar with. Basically, he won the 1957 Academy Award for Best Actor, and he was like the hottest item in Hollywood of the late 50s as this exotic creature. So in 56, which was his big year of making like a breakthrough, he starred in the highest grossing film of the year, which was King and I, a musical adaptation of the Broadway musical that he had starred in for a few years by then. There was 10 Commandments by Cecil B. DeMille, a 3.5-hour biblical spectacle where he plays Ramesses, the bad guy, and also Anastasia with Ingrid Bergman. And these were like all in 56. So he had like a big, in a way, coming out onto the big screen. And then his career started to move into kind of European co-productions, independent productions in the 60s, partly because Hollywood studio system had died by then, partly because his star image was of particular kind, and I will talk about the star image being particular kind. But basically today he's someone who's largely forgotten. Like I would say Brynner is remembered by people who are in their 70s or 80s. Even my age group will not necessarily know what he's about. Now, of course, I know what he's about because I've had a long-term fascination with the figure of Brynner, as this precisely his whole kind of aesthetic and the sense that he didn't fit in anywhere. But so during the pandemic, I was very bored, so I ended up doing a book on Brynner, and I will talk a bit about how I made the book. It's the most anally researched book you can find. I mean, it's a tough competition, but it really is. Even for me, it is very anal. And the book deals with his star image, and in order to make sense of that star image in terms of what are the kind of threads of coherence spanning basically 30 years of being in the public eye. Obviously masculinity, he performed a particular kind of alpha masculinity. He was basically my height, so not like a huge stature, but he performed this kind of excessive straight masculinity that was also an exotic masculinity. He was born in Vladivostok, spoke English with an accent, spoke some other languages as well, all with an accent. And in Hollywood, the production code, basically, we might remember production code from regulating, let's say, intimacy between, like, how long a kiss can be. And, you know, if you're on a bed, you have to have, like, one leg on the ground. But it also regulated so-called interracial intimacy, which meant that basically actors of color would not be romantic leads because that was against the code. Solution was to have white actors perform all kinds of brown face, black face, yellow face, and Yule did it all. But he was also someone who was never cast as a kind of regular American hero because of his strange looks and also his accent. So he was in between, but also someone who profited hugely from the racist system of Hollywood. But when working on this book, I ended up working, I mean, exoticism is kind of obvious, and I will go into why it's obvious, but I also started thinking about cosmopolitanism as this kind of, in many ways, I mean, there's the kind of cosmopolitanism of Yul Brynner's life story, you know, born in Vladivostok, living in Paris, moving into New York, LA, back to France. His kind of self-identification as a man of the world, who's at home everywhere, and who kind of, by extension, is from anywhere. He can play any role. He's kind of like pan-ethnic in that sense. But also cosmopolitanism as a post-war kind of commitment to plurality and human rights. I mean, United Nations, he worked with United Nations. There's a much conflict there, or let's say paradox there. So as an explanation of what will follow. But we will start with something a bit unsavory, I'm sorry. But this is the role for which he won the Oscar for Best Leading Actor. And it is kind of a wonder to behold. No. Yeah, I knew I would fail.
No, that's fine.
Oh, God, you are skilled.
No, it's just...
When I was a boy. Soul was so.
Not quite yet.
Yeah, it started line up.
Let's go back to you. Okay. Yeah, the clips wouldn't play from the thingy. Yes, so his exaggerated performance as this kind of a childlike yet super masculine king of Siam in the Rodgers Hammerstein musical. Basically, this is a role once his film career came to an end in the 70s. For the past 10 years of his life, he did very different versions of the musical on Broadway. They toured in the UK. So he played that like thousands of times, the same role. So in the end, towards the end of his life, he became, in the US in particular, very much identified as the king. So this is the role he was very much associated with. So this is a role he first took up in the mid-50s, 53, I think, before the film huged, and this is from the 80s before he died. He sort of performed like 2 days before his death or something like that. Hugely successful Orientalist story of a British school teacher who goes to civilize the courts in Siam. Much has been written about the book, much has been written about the musical. But it was the highest grossing film. It was super popular. The album sold a lot of copies. This is a statue of Yul Brynner in his hometown in Vladivostok. He grew up in the house behind. He was not. He came from a rich family, but then he was born in the 20s, and the revolution sort of came east slightly slowly. So when he was in his teens, they left the country. But Yul basically landed in the US in the 40s, and I'm not going into his younger career moves as a trapeze artist in Paris, or he was also a nightclub entertainer. This is important because it's connected to stuff. But this was his first Broadway role in the 40s. He played a Chinese poet. So you can sort of see the kind of formation of a star image without there being an agent or anyone sculpting a star image. He sort of did it himself, but there were also limitations to what roles he could sort of go for. And his so-called Mongolian looks, high cheekbones, made him apparently passable for a Chinese in that context. But it was King and I that, of course, continued this trajectory. But the same year, he was also Ramesses, man like a disco ball, super masculine. But you can also recognize certain repetitions in pose, in expression, the power pose, the grimness. Basically, he would play the same character in different roles. This kind of alpha masculinity that kept on repeating, and often very ornamental. Like in the clip from The King and I mean, basically in every scene he has a different kinds of silks with golden embroidery, and he's topless, sort of very decorative, sometimes with jewelry, sometimes with knots, but it's still alpha masculinity. And of course Ramesses wears dresses and very kind of glittery things, but he's also alpha masculine. But of course, if you think of like Orientalist masculinity, this is very much in line with that whole kind of continuum of imageries in Hollywood, but way beyond Hollywood. Also in '56, and we'll get back to this clip that was crudely interrupted. Yes. So here, Yule is a nightclub. He's basically, he plays a former general of Imperial Russian Army, now emigrated to Paris, who's kind of this Bengali character. Anastasia, I mean, the story is that, you know, whether she was or was not the only surviving child of the Romanov family, the royal family. Ingrid Bergman plays her, so he's kind of like the Svengali to Ingrid. But he also owns a nightclub, and he entertains in a nightclub. And the location is Paris. As a teenager, he was a nightclub performer in Paris. And actually, the woman who'll be joining him in song and dance is someone he had known since his teens. This is actually, there's actually a point to this. I'll get back to that family.
You have to move the cursor from the beginning.
Часами я научивал, сказал ты жизнь говорить помнить, верить,
Yet we'll get to the drinking songs. So basically, this was his debut, these three very different films. And although he was born in Russia, so you might, one way to interpret his kind of self-narratives, where he refused to tell the same story twice of where he was from. So one journalist, and they were kind of like full of fabulation. So for one journalist, he said, I was born in a gypsy camp under the stars. My mother died at childbirth. To another journalist, he will say, oh yes, I grew up in the Mongolian court, although there was no such thing in the 20s. Or basically I'm the family of Genghis Khan, the great ruler of Mongolia. He would keep on spinning these stories. There were at least, at some point, a journalist identified 12 different narratives where he was from, and when encountered with this question, he basically shrugged and said, you know, I am more than my origins. So there was this fabulation of kind of, he was from everywhere, no place at the same time, and also mythical places, kind of fantastic places. Sort of narrating, performing particular kinds of exoticism for the American public. But this was also a very kind of concrete way of holding on to privacy and not being identified as a Soviet migrant in Cold War US, because this was also an era of the kind of red terror and kind of red fear. So being actually a Russian in Hollywood wouldn't have been a good thing. So it sort of worked both ways. So in that sense, King of Siam, ruler of Egypt, and a Russian general, these are equally equally fictitious performances, you might say. So his star image surprisingly never became identified with Russian roles, although he did play them. He sort of played the whole spectrum. Not, for God's sake, no. It's not that attractive. You don't really want to see that. Yeah. Yes. So in the 50s, when he was exceedingly highly paid. So Tyrone Power died when making the film Solomon and Sheba, and they needed someone to replace Tyrone Power, who of course was this kind of beautiful man, romantic roles, but also a particular form of masculinity, very different from Yul Brynner. Yul stepped in, he was paid $1 million, which at that time was the highest anyone had been paid. And this basically gave him independence. He could get divorced and move to Europe. So that was the part of it. So he plays a very wise biblical king to Gina Lollobrigida's, a Queen of Sheba. There's a lot of pagan musical choreography happening, forbidden love and God, of course, because it's a biblical thing. But these were basically the 10 Commandments, and these films, they are very old school Hollywood kind of biblical spectacles, like huge groups of extras, kind of very long speeches involving Christian religion in both of them, for obvious reasons, but also this kind of sense of stuffiness, basically, in both of them. But he started in Hollywood from the highest echelon in terms of production costs, and then it was all downhill from there. They didn't make movies like this anymore. I mean, sure, Cleopatra happened, but what happened with Cleopatra is a story of itself. But this was the end of an era. I mean, of course, Hollywood studio system was in crisis already. I mean, 50s, it was dying. So he sort of got into last peak of the dying system. Now, I'll say a few words about what I did. Maybe I won't say so much about why I did it, but anyway. So during the pandemic, I realized I had done an article on Yul Brynner's star image, and then I was like, I have nothing to do, I am bored, so I might as well go back to this fetish project of mine. And I realized that much had happened with digital archives in the past 10 years, since I mainly study new media, or network media, so I hadn't been looking at the archives. But with optical scanning, basically the databases for newspapers, for magazines, you can do searches, textual searches, to huge masses of stuff, which is a drastic change from actually using microfilms or browsing through the physical magazines, or using digitized sources that are PDFs. I mean, basically scanned as images where you can't find text. So I went wild, and I used my university's facilities. I used the Mormon-run newspapers.com database. I used archive.org's. They have a great collection of film magazines, actually. I was in Sydney for a while when the pandemic sort of was coming to a close, maybe not. So I used basically 7 different archives to get to this stuff. And I downloaded 5,000 things, and then I used 1,000 of them. And since I'm not kidding, it is an anal project, I reference 1,000 with page numbers. But there's kind of a point to that. The publisher was like, do you really want to do this? I was like, yes, because the list of literature is like 70 pages long. But it is, I think no one has done this in film history studies, and there's kind of a methodological point to this, because when you go through vast amounts of stuff, you can actually do it pretty quickly. You can figure out not only stuff about film reception in different countries, depending on the archives, depending on your language skills, of course. I use stuff in English and French and Finnish. I didn't have access to the Swedish archives, unfortunately, but I think it would have been too much like the Finnish one. And then English-speaking newspapers from different bits of the world. So you can actually find out about reception of their films, you can find about star image, but you can also find out about projects that people were gossiped to take on. And this is always going to be more than the mass of the films they actually did. So you actually get this get this extra aspect of the star image and its limits. So he was rumored to play Buddha, for example. any role really, like lots of kind of horrible sounding projects that never did happen. But it allows for a different kind of perspective into what you can usually do. Because if you search for, let's say, a reception of a film, you search for that film. But if you never knew that that film was never made, you never knew that he was actually the first, choice for a role. So you get into this whole realm of gossip. Very fascinating if you are nerdy at all, and luckily I am very nerdy. So I went through lots of sources over 2 years. I did watch all of Brynner's 40 movies. These include 2 cameos. And I watched them all twice. And some of the movies I've seen more than twice. So in a way, I started with the films, and I did the archival stuff, and then in the end I had another look at the films again. Some biographies, there are 3, 4, depending how you interpret things, and also documentaries about Brynner. There are a couple. So I tried to, in terms of paratexts, I sort of tried to look around. Also how he's remembered, so GIF culture, kind of how he lives on as these isolated gestures, as reaction GIFs, which is, I think, actually quite apt if you think of his performance style. So this is how the stuff looks in practice. They're very different. I mean, that one is a physical copy from my university library, the Finnish one. And once you start going through, and also the thing about doing this kind of archival work is that oftentimes when in star image studies, people will focus on certain kinds of magazines and newspapers. So they'll read Variety, they will read whatever is the biggest kind of thing in their country. They might read New York Times for certain things. So you always get a certain canon of reception. Whereas here we have rural newspapers, we have regional newspapers, we have random short-lived fan things that have just been archived. And I treated them more horizontally, so I didn't prioritize the kind of important sources. And this also made it possible to look at kind of repetitions and how content traveled, both in terms of syndicated press in the US, but also internationally. So you get the same variations of stories in British pop magazines, in Finnish pop magazines, and Portuguese pop magazines. Basically, copyright was very liberal. I mean, there's much liberty in terms of copyright. So I became also obsessed with these repetitions, like a narrative repeats with variations. And here you have some of that repetition happening. So certain things about Brynner's star image become really clear when you go through this mass of stuff. Not surprisingly, baldness, but he was like the only bald kind of like romantic hero, although he didn't really play romantic roles. They were always kind of like almost romantic leads. Because he was sort of too much by definition. But I mean, from today's perspective, it's difficult to understand what a big thing that was. Like, it made no sense by contemporary standards that you could have someone without hair who would still be like this sex thing. Like, it just, like, and it just keeps on repeating. Even when he died, Le Monde, in the obituary, the headline is "Bald actor dies." I mean, in 85 or 6. I mean, it's kind of wild. The Mongolian thing. He was the Mongolian Valentino, but the exoticism of Mongolia keeps on repeating. The gypsy thing is a bit of a teaser to what's to come. But baldness, egghead with oomph, and the sex appeal. They are really, like, one of the narratives that would repeat was his crazy sex appeal. Like, and it's different anonymous women who are cited, like he walks into a room and you can feel his presence and, the flash of his eyes. He walks like a tiger. You go back in time into the kind of prehistoric place of like raw masculinity. It's like, he's exotic like a lion. He will sort of take you like a lion, although that would imply a kind of eating people. But anyway, this kind of like crazy sex appeal. So he was really framed as a exotic sex symbol. excessively so. And now some of the same in Portuguese. So again, you get the tiger. He was a tiger, he was a lion, he was a panther, he was many things. But this is from a fan magazine, and it's a special issue all about Yule and his career development. And you get the baldness, you get the same pictures. It keeps on repeating. And of course, you can ask, like, was it necessary for me to go through all these sources? Like, did I really have to? Like, no. I would say the saturation point was reached quite early, but then I just couldn't stop. And even today, for teaching, I've been going back to the archives, and I'm like, oh, this is available. Now I almost still get this kind of urge. It's not healthy. It's a bit obsessive. But I mean, it's a particular thing with archival research that I've gotten before. I just go into a very nerd space with things. But I mean, to track repetitions, obviously you have to have a vast amount of material. But there was also all kinds of surprises in it. Let me see why. Yes, so some of the roles he played, we're getting back to the pan-ethnicity. So these are sort of after his career was no longer ascending. Although in that movie, that's still like a late 50s movie. But anyway, here he's an Irani colonel. Here he's a, Russian Cossack. Here he's an Indian freedom fighter fighting the colonial British. Here he's a Greek-American gangster who's been exiled to his home island where he's never been. It's a horrible film. This is, Zapata, I think. Native American chief. It's pretty, it is what it is. Nazi general, Creole gunfighter, son of a slave who battles racism in a small US town, in brownface, and a Yugoslav partisan. So a man of the world who could play any. Yes, and budget-wise these are very different. So that one actually, where he's a Native American chief, is The Kings of the Sun, which was like a big budget movie, a huge flop, surprisingly, at the box office. But otherwise, we are moving into small independent productions, and with Battle of Neretva, we are talking about it's a Yugoslav production, but also with German, I think Italian and French money. He also did establish his own production company, and he wanted to be a producer, and that sort of never worked out because he was paid so much for acting that it was easier to make money that way. But I mean, he was a TV director before becoming a Broadway star, so he had this view of himself as a kind of like, maybe not an auteur, but anyway, a director who's more than just an actor. And again, we get the Nazis. Here, fictitious Mideastern country, he's fighting for the freedom of his Arab brothers. Here, Israeli secret police. Here, oh God, that's a horrible movie as well. He's a American, Polish, Japanese surface rescuer working in Japan. So everything. But never really the regular. If he was an American character, he was Greek-American, he was Russian-American, he was French-American, he was Creole, but he was never sort of the corn-fed, regular Joe, because that was not his figure. So his star image was both a great facilitator, because he got to do stuff with high kind of profile, but then also limitator. Also his particular, I mean, you saw bits of his acting style. I would call it performance style more than acting style. Very stylized, very static. Sometimes he does sing and dance, but there's a lot of posturing and a lot of like emoting, like he wasn't subtle necessarily with things. And this meant that his acting style became dated. If we move into the 60s, you get kind of actor studio, kind of growing the more naturalistic styles of acting, and also the types of films he was identified with. Basically, that whole scene had died. So he was sort of, his whole kind of look and style was dated by the 60s. In a way, his kind of like exotic stories of narrative, they are more like the movie star narratives or kind of autobiographical narratives of the 20s or 30s. If we think like Theda Bara, for example, you know, who was a Midwestern girl who suddenly was refashioned into this temptress who was half Arab and half French and had this allure. So there was similar kind of excessive exoticism to Yule than there had been to movie stars way before his time. But they were sort of, his star image was his own making. There was no agent, there was no one else to do it. There was no studio to package him as this thing. He wasn't limited to one studio. So in '56 he worked with all 3 major studios, and he also wanted to have his own production company. So in a way he was a self-made man, but then that sort of product, it didn't age well. Let's just put it that way. And of course what happened to the movie industry is one thing, but I would say that he's sort of moving into small budget films, he would still get paid well. Like when making that film, The Rescue from Somewhere, I forget the name, he would be flown by helicopter to the site where it was shot. Other people would sort of have to walk or take a car or something. He had a helicopter. That Yule. But this next clip I'm going to show you is when things were still kind of okay. So this is from The Journey, which is a '58 film. Deborah Kerr, who was Miss Anna in King and I, they are sort of reunited. But here Yule is a Soviet officer in occupied Hungary, and he's not, there's kind of romance, but not really, he's not really a nice guy. But kind of maybe like an asshole with a heart of gold. That was the role that he liked to play. I mean, knowingly. I mean, that was sort of his brand, you might say. And let me get to the beginning, because this is actually a nice clip. Okay. Well, nice. I mean,
what's her name? Margie. Margie.
What am I supposed to do now?
Better drink it. Drink it!
Margie, просим пить, а будущее мне думать, а прошлом не служить. Танцевинца! Заметила! Yes! Пошли!
Honey, are you all right?
Well, it's got no taste, but it sure cracks a wallop.
Margie.
Bravo! Done like a real expert. Наливай. But there's another way.
yes, that's a man for you. Eats glass. So that's not Deborah Kerr. She's in the movie. Clearly, this is a comic sidekick. So actually, when making The Journey, which was shot in Central Europe, there was like a huge refugee crisis after the war, and it had been like a decade that people were in camps in Austria. I mean, where they were filming this film, they couldn't film it in Hungary. But he became engaged with the United Nations and refugee stuff, and I'll get to that, but I want to show some topless pictures before I do that. But this journey was kind of like, it was influential in terms of the direction that his preoccupations took. So, but these are some examples of his particular kind of brand of masculinity. So from Brothers Karamazov, which is a 50s film, where this is William Shatner, by the way, from Star Trek, who plays his brother, who's a monk, a religious young person. He was topless. I mean, in King and I, he was sort of topless and not topless, sort of showing chest. But this was very much, I mean, thinking of his kind of brand, it was this kind of muscular torso that was displayed freely. And all the way to his last film, Death Rage, wonderful Italian B movie with disco soundtrack. I quite like that movie, actually. And also The Ultimate Warrior, which was a 75 film. Death Rage was 76, where he's an ultimate warrior in post-apocalyptic American city, maybe New York, where he poses as a man statue, and it's kind of funny because he was not very short. He was in his 50s. He was not very fit by contemporary standards at that point. But it was more like his star image, and he would do the same pose as in King and I. But here we have Volatile Dimitri from the Brothers Karamazov. We have again the Native American chief. We have again the Indian freedom fighter. And we have Pete Novak, who's a CIA agent scouting through the saunas of London to find a particular man. Part of it is done topless. And sometimes this toplessness was explicitly sexualized and sometimes not. I mean, of course, it depends on the viewer. This is the Kings of the Sun, where he's tied up in order to be sacrificed by the Incas. And it's like this Christ-like pose. You get the copper makeup, whole body makeup in this case. And here it looks like oral sex. It's meant to look like fellatio, but it's actually tending to a wound on his thigh. He rarely played romantic parts. There was like this building of tension here and there. There was lots of erotization, but also these roundabout ways of dealing with that. There was no romantic closure really to his films, although he sometimes got lucky in the films, but that was later in his career. For a long time, he did not get lucky in the films. But I mean, his kind of forms of bodily display are quite something. If you think of other actors, and this is from early 60s, maybe 63. So if you think of other actors like Kirk Douglas, would strip. You had Tony Curtis who would strip. Actually, in Taras Bulba, Tony Curtis, who was like 5 years younger, played Yule's son. It's a horrible film, so no clips from that. There's also song and dance, but I mean, it's really. I'm not saying this is high quality, but I mean it's also very boring. With this one, actually, you have feathers and stuff. It's kind of more entertaining. But there was a particular thing with the white men taking their shirts off, white American dudes, than this type of body aesthetic. But this is the only instance when actually he's imprisoned or things are done to him. Usually he would be the protagonist, with a whip. There are a lot of posing with whips, different kinds of whips in his films. So the kind of barbarian savagery is one of the themes cutting into his star image, where this is like a rare occasion of him being like a passive kind of object of whatever gaze you might want to have. Many people remember this. People of a certain generation who've seen it on a kind of Sunday afternoon film thingy will remember it for many reasons. Anyway, so suddenly we have this. We have Yule as special consultant for the United Nations. Now, how did this happen? Why would they want this guy to be a special consultant? Well, it was because of the refugee situation. He was also a photographer. So actually, he worked with the Magnum photo agency, which is was already very established then. So he was an amateur photographer who became professional. And he became very preoccupied with the refugee situation and did a book, Bring Forth the Children, together with Ingrid Morad, who was also a Magnum photographer. And in this book, they are in the camps in the Central Europe and Middle East, more precisely sort of Gaza and the West Bank. And he did a TV documentary, like an hour TV documentary. That's partly, it's like an ode to United Nations and the values of United Nations, the kind of kind of belief in individual human rights independent of where you are, the idea that we all have the same value independent of where we are from, this kind of very liberal idea of rights that's been critiqued from many angles, but was kind of like a novelty after the war. I mean, there was kind of like a need for that articulation. And that TV documentary, it's sort of, it is an ad for United Nations, but it also has pretty grim imagery, particularly from the Israeli camps. And it didn't try to sugarcoat things over. It didn't stop Yul from being in this movie that was propaganda for Israel a couple of years later. Like, there's no conflict there, clearly. But I mean, he was sort of volatile. So he was named as a special commissioner for refugee affairs, and he did this work on and off for a number of years with the United Nations, organizing different kinds of charity events, bringing in money, and pretty much like movie stars do today, like if you think of Angelina Jolie's work with the refugees, bringing kind of attention. The thing was that this was like a forgotten crisis, and using your celebrity in a different way. And this is something that Brynner himself talked a lot about, because he sort of claimed not to be comfortable with his fame. I doubt this personally, but there was a bit of posturing there. But still, this is something he did. And then things get really tricky. Now, he did have this narrative of himself that his mother was Romani, his father may have been whatever. This story did change. The mother may have died at birth, maybe didn't die at birth, but he claimed Romani roots. In his early teens, in Paris, he worked as a nightclub entertainer, getting back to that, and he worked with the Dmitrievich family, again, the woman from Anastasia, and this is her brother. So they were friends for life, and he basically, as a child, self-adopted to their family. This also meant he took on identity of a Romani. He spoke a few words of the language, but then again, you know, in the diaspora, not many people speak the language anyway. And he was basically the only celebrity in the 70s and 80s, and he was still a celebrity because he was a major Broadway star, even in the 80s, who claimed to have these roots. So he became a spokesperson for Romani rights. So he was the president of the Second World Congress for Romani rights, chairing it. And he would write op-eds for like New York Times, writing about the oppression of his people, which is kind of bizarre, given that actually his grandfather was a founder of the city of Vladivostok, and he was a Swiss German. Anyway. So this is quite a striking bit of archival material. This is Yul Brynner going to a Romani camp in France with his aristocratic wife, Jacqueline, in a Rolls Royce, as one does, and talking about the importance of connecting with the culture of your origins in this scene of abject poverty. There's a lot of conflict there. Now, how to make sense of this? I mean, the whole, basically looking at the roles of Yul Brynner, most of them are examples of what quite fairly can be classified as cultural appropriation, but also it goes beyond that, because it becomes this kind of excessive performance of different kinds of ethnicities and nationalities. I mean, there's kind of a lot of overdrive into it all, which is one reason you don't see these films anywhere. They're not sort of the kind of, they haven't aged well, let's just put it that way. Like, there's not much of an audience beyond maybe Westworld, beyond Magnificent Seven, the Western, and beyond King and I, because people still, seem to like the film for reasons I find difficult to understand, but it's sort of a classic in its own right. So in a way, it is obvious the kind of racism, exoticism baking into racism, and the kind of very complex, I would say, issues to do with privilege here. So great privilege, also particular positioning in the racial taxonomies of Hollywood. But for me, cosmopolitanism was a way to sort of talk about this without fixing things into this one reading, which I think is completely just, but I think it also simplifies things. Because, I mean, what's happening here is actually pretty, like there's a contradiction to this that can't be resolved. So he was embraced by the Romani community, who didn't seem to care what his origins were, really, because he did the job. And at the same time, he performed this this ethnic drag in his films and beyond. So they made, I mean, come on, they made an album together where it's Yule who's named and not the guy whose music it actually is. And now I will play a clip of their music because I can. And you see it's Yule Brynner and Dimitrievich isn't really. Yay! There we go. This is from, forget the name now, but US Saturday night TV show of the 70s. Ash was grown for his role as a Mexican freedom fighter in Villa Rides. Yeah, so actually this is actually late 60s and not early 70s. So he operated with this excessive exoticism. And this is a book I've had for quite a long time. The recipes aren't very good, but it's an interesting book. So there's a ghostwriter whose recipes they are, and then Yul Brynner does this cosmopolitan sprinkle on top of everything, because he's a man of the world, so he's at home in many cultures. So in his name are provided these little vignettes, not just into French cuisine, but also culture, that are kind of expert sites. He was never allowed to go into Thailand because King and I was considered kind of offensive for good reasons. But, you know, he kind of performs this familiarity with Thai culture. There's Japanese culture. He had been to Japan, but to make like a movie. And there's, of course, Romani cuisine. There's all kinds of world kitchens are presented, but also with these insider tips into how you want to behave and what really is local. The whole book is catering to, let's say, a Midwestern homemaker. So, for example, in the Russian cuisine, you have a very strange dish that is like a version of the prawn salad of the 70s, which is like caviar on half an avocado with mayonnaise and lettuce, which is like Russian cuisine as I know it. That's not how it works. But in this one, there's a whole scene written about, imagine yourself, you are in a feast in a Romani camp, and there's, under the stars, and the music is playing, and it's like kind of a romantic 50s movie. And it positions the reader, who would be this homemaker in my interpretation, into the center of, like, you are the heart of the party. This kind of excessive exoticism of the Romani cause, and then of the Romani culture, and then at the same time he's doing this. I would say there's a tension here that we can't resolve, and he sort of had it both ways. Like, he would eat the cake and he would keep the cake and he would do all kinds of things with the cake. But for me, the cosmopolitanism was a way to keep things slightly open. I mean, to sort of like present different sides of the same story, because ambiguity is rich in his narrative. Like, there are so many versions of stories, and if you think of like something like political coherence in any of this, good luck, like you're not going to find it. Yeah, he was politically liberal, but also fiercely anti-socialist. So there you go. But his kind of style of posturing, the excessive stylized masculinity, ornamental masculinity, it sort of started going into camp terrain pretty quickly. So here we have The Magnificent Seven, a film that he actually wanted to produce, and then he sort of let other people produce it because he got lots of money from making it. And the kind of his reenactment of the role of the gunslinger in Westworld. But there's also Adios Sabata, an Italo spaghetti western, which is completely over the top. So you get the posturing in this kind of fringe leather costume, showing a lot of skin, again, and it's a completely over the top. He made a couple of spaghetti westerns where the performance, these are stylized performances, but they're like laconic masculinity. This is also kind of laconic masculinity, but also excessive in its aesthetic kind of displays and aesthetic, and also in the bodily displays. So when working on the book, it became kind of clear to me that yes, camp has to go in there somewhere as this kind of excessive posturing, excessive, but also playfulness, because there is kind of playfulness to the whole thing. So it's not like he's performing things under kind of like not square quotes but quotes. Or even better, if you think of, has anyone seen Light at the Edge of the World? No reason to. It's horrible. It's with Kirk Douglas. It's a Jules Verne adaptation, and he plays a bad pirate. He's a really bad pirate with his band. I mean, they look like they're from a band, but it's a band of pirates. And he lands on this in southern Chile, in this barren landscape with a horse that can also be equipped to be a unicorn, but it's a killer unicorn because that's a really sharp horn, and he's going to gut people with that horn. It's quite extraordinary. Even contemporary reviewers would comment, they would frame this as camp. And this was a time when camp had been moving from particularly queer male subcultures into the mainstream through pop culture, and also being commodified in such a way. But I would say this is more like playing onto the kind of camp aesthetics without this being like camp. Kirk Douglas doesn't do camp in this movie. He's very much straight in that sense. Whereas Yule really is doing his thing in quite a different way. So my interest in the particular, I wouldn't say I've been interested in Yul Brynner's acting style, because I don't think there really was an acting style. It's a performance style, where appearing is much more important than any kind of interpretation. And it's his figure and the kind of particular displays of that figure, as the man statue that if he's not doing this, he's doing this, kind of the stillness, the kind of statue body that repeats throughout his career. So camp entered the picture in the book to talk about these aesthetics from a slightly different angle, because I really think there's something going on here that sort of escapes literal readings. And to give you a space for your own interpretations, I'm going to end with a final clip, which is from the Ringo Starr vehicle, The Magic Christian, another movie I suspect no one has seen. Again, it's a horrible movie. It sounds on paper like it could be only good. It has Rachel Welch as a dominatrix. It has topless gay bodybuilders in a disco. It has things, but it's horrible. It's actually boring. Yule has a cameo, and this, of course, is Roman Polanski. And we will maybe now. Will it skip to the next one? No, it won't skip to the next one. We'll go here. And we'll go here.
Would you like to buy a girl a drink, big boy? Here's looking at you, mister. Mad about the boy. I know it's stupid to be mad about the boy. I'm so ashamed of it, but must admit the sleepless nights I've had about the boy. On the silver screen, he melts my foolish heart in every single scene. Although I'm quite aware that here and there are traces of the cared about the boy. Lord knows I'm not a fool girl. I really shouldn't care. Lord knows I'm not a schoolgirl in the flurry of her first affair. If I could employ a little magic that would finally destroy this dream that pains me and enchains me, but I can't because I'm mad about the boy, mad about the boy, mad about the boy.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes.
I'll leave it here. Now, anything you ever wanted to know about Yul Brynner, just ask me.
But this is just a cameo, isn't it?
It's a cameo. It's an uncredited cameo. But he was no newcomer to queer culture, so he was friends with Jean Cocteau and his kind of group of friends ever since his days in Paris. He did pose nude, full frontal nudity for Platt Lines, who is well known for documenting male beauty. Good friends with Cecil Beaton. He also posed for Cecil Beaton, but as a fashion model. And there are many, like in there are many diaries, no, there are three actually, memoirs and diaries, where completely independent of one another, they sort of gossip about Yul's kind of omnivorous sexuality, basically. So he was part of, again, cosmopolitanism. He was part of this cosmopolitan kind of society where being queer was not an exception. He also had an affair with Marlene Dietrich, who of course was into many things. So cosmopolitanism also has cosmopolitan sexualities, where different kinds of sexual identities can coexist without necessarily even being fixed into one. And this is particularly interesting because his public image was like this insatiable straight Casanova, like hysterically straight, you could say, which is maybe why this works, because of his star image. But it's also like he knows what he's doing. This isn't sort of, it's kind of skillful.
And he also plays well within this self-fabulation figure of exoticism and sexism and sex appeal that he built himself.
Yeah, and of course, the song is all about the boy, which is basically, what's the name of the guy who made it? But it's basically, it's an ode to, it's a song about adoring a movie star. And of course, this is like meta. He's almost serenading himself here. Yeah, gets very complex. No, I love this clip dearly, as you may have noticed.
Thank you. I was thinking about this. This is a huge program, research program actually, and there's a lot of things that we can pinpoint, especially in terms of methodology, how to really engage in a huge comprehensive archive and try to not only just build some sort of biography, but also how one kind of build this self-image and how it plays along with the posture, with the public image, with the star tests, and this idea that the exoticism is also a place to appeal, in like sex appeal, but also like this, I can embody all otherness. You know, like I can be any otherness, fill in the blanks, any other that you need for me to perform. I'm going to perform, but with this excessive posture that is almost the same, it kind of can be read as a ironic, an ironic and ambivalent place of this exoticism, you know.
Yeah.
Like, it's the same posture, it's the same gesture, it's the same face, and you can just apply like a mask to any other, to Japanese, to Romani, to, you know, Mongolian or whatever. So Thai and indigenous and Mexican. And yes, it is. There is this commentary on this, the otherness, this racist actually kind of idea to place this exotic figure as the other from within the American culture, white culture, or whatever. But it also has this ironic, because it's like this mask can be, it's like a reflexive commentary on this mask, you know. There is the same posture that can apply to everything. And once you read it from a historical point of view, it's like, there is something there that could be made a commentary on this. It kind of brings forward this commentary on this. There is something here. Exoticism is, it plays along within these ideas, no?
It does.
You know.
It does, but I mean, mainly how exoticism has been written about, it's something that is being done to you. And of course, if you look at histories of Hollywood, that's kind of clear that it's worked, you know, both to, I mean, it's sort of like the ethnic drag, it goes many ways. It's to make these Mid-Eastern people more interesting by giving them exotic roots. And it's a way of making, like Rita Hayworth, you know, creating whiteness. It can be many things, but with Yule, it was this self-exotization. And that's kind of, it comes from a place of privilege, so he could do that, but still not be pinned down. Even with his Russian accent. I mean, the king of Siam has a Russian accent. The ruler of Egypt has a Russian accent. They all do. But even that didn't. He sort of was able to somehow play the game, which, you know, for me, it speaks of a certain kind of privilege, or just like he didn't care, which again is a sign of privilege.
And controls the narrative, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he stopped speaking to his sister until she died, basically, because she had revealed details about him as a person. Yeah. Nice guy.
Gente, alguém tem alguma questão? Curiosidade?
Eu tenho uma pergunta, só que eu acho que talvez já tenha sido respondida.
Não, mas faça do mesmo jeito. Você quer fazer em inglês? Pode fazer.
I was thinking about cinema studies in general, and you said that there is a dimension of this research that comes from a fetish with you.
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily correlate to other things you're studying, or maybe yes. And I was thinking about that, how this research could link with your studies about media studies in general, and your other interests in research. I'm thinking about that as a cinema student, trying to think how can we correlate our researches with different fields today. And I believe your research is very contemporary, right? Social networks and media.
Well, I'm kind of all over the place. So I was trained in film and TV studies in the 90s, as I was taught to say, in the 1900s. So that's my background. But I went into internet research in the 1900s. But I do have a side hustle in media history, but it's mainly histories of pornography and kind of scandal tabloids and the Finnish context. So I have really good access to historical sources through my institution because the library has everything. But I probably browsed through more Finnish porn, print porn than any person beyond the users of the stuff. So there's that, in a way. I was also trained in cultural history, so I'm technically a historian. I'm a really bad historian, but it's kind of a passion of mine. Because this is such a particular, in film studies, star image studies, that was like a 90s thing. It was like a fashionable thing when I was a first year student. That was a long time ago. So it's, in a way, it is not, in film studies, it's not like a field that attracts many people, because it is very niche. And I think people who end up doing it do it for particular kinds of reasons. Sometimes they are collaborations, and then sometimes it's just this interest. But I think through Yul Brynner, you can sort of tell interesting stories. So you can see late Hollywood and also the kind of post-Hollywood golden era crisis from a different angle. So I haven't been particularly interested in his biography, or who was he really, I don't care. I've been interested in the narratives and also what's been possible, for whom and how can we then understand this or see this history differently, because people tend to focus on kind of the usual suspects, like certain actors and directors over others, and then certain characters become sidetracked or ignored at all. But I would say, in terms of like connecting this to my sort of work on, being in sexuality studies sort of helps to figure out the excessive of the sex stuff, the rhetorics of that. But I also been interested in sort of what remains and how people are remembered. So the last chapter of the book, it looks at, obituaries, so how he was remembered. Again, the bald actor dies. But also the way he's remembered, the animated GIFs, the kind of very meager life as a meme that has happened, and the kind of, which I think is actually very apt, because this kind of, his appearing and these kind of repetitive gestures were basically at the heart of his star image. So in a way it's very apt that they keep on being recycled, independent of context, forever and ever. Of course, that's a certain bits from his career. For some reason, this has never circulated.
And he's not appropriated as a camp figure?
Yeah,
he would play really well within this queer appropriation of his image, isn't it?
Yeah, he could, but he's forgotten to a degree that I think that point of reference would be lost. And there are real issues about what his films were about. So, all the brown face, all the yellow face, any face, that makes the consumption kind of difficult, even through irony. He's become kind of like, do you really want to go there, kind of a, it's like, yeah, a bit risky, yeah. But I'm all over the place. In terms of, I get bored very easily, so. So when I actually wrote a Yul Brynner article, that was to escape from the boredom, because I was writing a book on sex and play, focusing on documentary films of this queer Berlin-based filmmaker called Jan Soldat. And I was writing about two films dealing with age play, so adult babies, and I was like, I am bored with these diapers, like I need something to keep me entertained, and hence Yul Brynner. Yeah, with the pandemic.
You can say you're born with some age play, writing about the age play, and you're born with stuff.
Yeah.
Born with that.
Yeah, but it's true.
Only you.
Yeah, but I should say that my fascination with Yul Brynner precedes the pandemic. So it goes, because many people ask me, so why would you? And it's like, that's a good question. But it was my mom's teen fan magazines of the late 50s and early 60s, and they're like, pretty people. And then there's Yul Brynner, who doesn't fit in. And the editors have a hard time with the baldness. They want to use pictures of him with a wig, because they can't deal with the baldness of it. So I was very fascinated by the figure, and it took me a long time to see any of his films. And I've never been particularly interested in the films, except a couple of them. But for me, it was basically this kind of like, where did he fit in and how did he fit in? Yes, the aesthetics of Yul Brynner. Yeah. Yep.
Is he an indigenous person? And is he, it's interesting.
Yeah, precisely, because he was a white cis guy, but in the taxonomies of Hollywood, he was almost white. And then he could just do anything, and he really did use that to his advantage, I mean, in a very calculated way. Yeah. And I think looking at that story, it opens up avenues of what was possible for whom, under what circumstances. So it is a story of absolute privilege and actually great success, but it's also a story about the racial taxonomies of Hollywood and racial imaginaries. I mean, I could talk endlessly just about The King and I and what's going on in there, because there's a lot that's going on in there. But I mean, his performances of Russianness, they are equally over the top. It's like Hollywood reimaginings of basically the culture that he grew up in. So it's all kind of this excessive posturing. Yeah.
And also it has a tradition of this kind of masculine performance of this ethnic variation with Valentino, you said yourself. Valentino was also this kind of white enough, but also exotic enough, to play well, to build a whole public image, star image around this appealing male, but also exotic.
Yeah, and kind of oriental,
Kind of oriental, yeah.
but I mean, there was also the kind of femininity to Valentino. Yeah, I mean, he was
Valentino was appropriated through the queer culture.
Yeah.
As this ambiguous masculinity because of this feminized posture and gestures.
Yeah.
Not you,
No, I can sort of see why that wouldn't be though, as well. Yeah, but I mean, the contemporary film magazines, because they didn't know how to place him. Mm-hmm. So Valentino and the Mongolian Valentino, that was sort of the pigeonhole for this. Yeah.
It's a little bit silly.
Go ahead.
There is eu não sei como falar assim em inglês. Novela.
You can say telenovela, so properly
Telenovela. Os 10 Mandamentos. E there is Pharaoh. There looks like a lot his character when he plays the Egypt.
Yeah.
Saba, Saba.
Yes. And I can't find which one this character is. I think he's Pharaoh Ramses, but
It's the same. It's the same character. He's playing Ramses Pharaoh as well.
Yes, and I think it's so interesting that he looks a lot with the actor.
Mm.
I don't know. It's a little bit silly, but I remember that, and it may be consequences, not consequence. I want to say, but I don't know. Não é uma referência.
Como se fosse uma alusão, você fala?
Isso, como se fosse uma eu esqueci tudo.
Como se fosse uma citação direta?
Não direta, mas por ele...
Mas uma imagem que vai se repetindo.
Sim, por ele ter sido talvez um personagem marcante, uma figura marcante. Talvez essa imagem tenha se propagado no senso comum de como ele deveria parecer. E aí, tantos anos depois, a novela foi feita e pensaram, esse personagem tem que
Fica
ser
sendo assim a imagem pôster assim do faraó, né? How this image was created like an imaginary, how to portray Ramses, and it's appropriated these days. You know, like these places is how to characterize Ramses pharaoh. It's like that, and it's been an influence. Yeah, it's been played again and again and again. You know, it's like the go-to image to how to characterize Ramses pharaoh, because this telenovela, this contemporary telenovela of the Ten Mandaments, I don't know, this Christian, you know,
Yes.
The 10, how do you say that?
Commandments.
Commandments.
That's
10
also the name of this movie.
You can clearly see that I have no Christian background. Sorry. The 10 Commandments, this telenovela is called 10 Commandments, and has this character, Ramses, and it's the same characterization.
Yeah.
It's really similar. So this is what Arthur is referring.
Yeah.
The actor looks a lot alike. I mean, not a lot alike, but it looks enough alike to remember the character and see the I forgot the word I just said.
The similarities.
The similarities.
Yeah. And of course this is Cecil B. DeMille's imagining of ancient Egypt, which is very particular. But I mean, Charlton Heston plays Moses. I mean, it is pretty, like when you start to think about. Yeah.
But it did play an important role in how to establish a kind of imagery on the period of these characters, these historical characters or even biblical characters.
And this
it's the go place too, you know.
Yeah.
When you get it really helped shape the imagery of this contest.
Yeah. And actually, Brynner was hired for this film because of his role on stage as the King of Siam. So he's basically playing the same role. But this was like a hugely popular movie, and if you see it, I mean, it's 3.5 hours. It is kind of a horror, like a boring horror to watch. But hugely popular, and also because it's Christian, so it's been on replay on television. It's considered like child safe, so it really has this afterlife. I mean, it still hasn't gone out of circulation, which is kind of interesting. I mean, it's 56.
It's the same face. I mean, the same gesture, posture.
Yeah.
Gesture is the same image.
Yeah, and then I got into a rabbit hole thinking about roles of Charlton Heston. I got into Burt Lancaster, and it's like the actors who would basically be topless. They would actually play a range of ethnicities, the white American actors, like any kind, but they were different kinds of roles than he would play. Like the kind of ethnic drag it meant many ways, but there was something about showing the semi-naked body, never quite, like he showed more flesh than most, that then was connected to this kind of flexibility. Or maybe also, yeah.
But you can sexualize him, but never romanticize him, isn't it?
It kind of,
This distinction of there is love and romance that is appropriate, and there is object of desire, and you can desire and look, but it's almost like a guilty pleasure.
And my friend who's in her 80s, like she has a great appreciation for Yul Brynner. She lives in New York, and she was saying that you know, as a teenager, like you couldn't say that you liked Yul Brynner because he was too much, like it was like so much sex. Like no good Jewish girl would say they liked Yul Brynner because of the excessive thing, which is, you know, from my perspective, it hasn't been like the most obvious thing, but for her it was, yeah. you would watch the films, but you wouldn't sort of say you liked him because that would mark you as kind of a slutty teenager.
But would you say that it plays a role in the taxonomy of raciality?
Yeah.
Like that? I mean, sexualize, it's
Yeah, but
something
a bit from a distance. Yeah.
The other races.
Yeah. And I mean, in this kind of movies with romantic thing, I mean, he dies a lot. Mm-hmm. He dies at the end of the journey. There's a lot of like, in King and I, he just dies. Like out of, he sings and dances and then he's feeling a bit weak and he dies of a broken heart. So this kind of romance that is being built, you can't have that really. You can't have Miss Anna go with this beast. Ramesses, of course, it doesn't end well for Ramesses either. Yeah, but he's no romantic. So the romantic tension it's a very classic solution, of course, just to have them die. In the Invitation to a Gunfighter, where he fights the racists in the US, there's a romantic plot, but it's resolved by him dying. So it keeps on happening. Yeah.
I was wondering if you found in your research in magazines and tabloids discourse about people wondering their ethnicity, because you said he kept it all very tight, very secretive, wouldn't speak to his sister, and I can see how that worked out for him in wanting to be so diverse in this mask, this mag mask he would put on. But if there was this question about where he really comes from, and if that was ever an issue, and I was also thinking about even that the word that he's bald, of course that there's this eccentricity about that specifically, but it's also sort of like a placeholder because we have to categorize him as something.
Yep.
Well, I don't know if he's like French actor, Yugoslavian actor, oh, he's the bald one. That's all we can say about him. But if there wasn't this underlying question, because I don't know if it's the same movie, I think probably not, but Elizabeth Taylor was Cleopatra.
Yeah.
And that is obviously a case of a white woman that could play that ethnicity, and that there was this privilege, and there was the washing of that. But that wasn't the case with him, because he wasn't just a white American guy who was suddenly playing Ramses. And if people were sort of wondering about him, and if that was ever a problem in his career.
Well, he would sort of spin these stories, and he was confronted about the stories already in the 50s. Like these don't match up, and he was also asked there's a French interview from the 50s where there's like the journalist says like there are these variations. So which one is your favorite? And he said it's something like me being a Swiss Mongolian born in Brooklyn. Like that's my favorite. So there was this playfulness. And in some of the fan magazines, reading those, it becomes kind of clear that people people sort of knew he was Russian. I mean, come on, his accent. But that would spoil the fun, because the speculation sold, like it went on in the fan magazines, it sort of was of interest, it sold copies, it suited him very well. But in those fan magazines, it's kind of clear that people sort of had very snarky comments about it, that like they weren't believing it. And this is actually something that goes back into like the silent era, where actually these excessive stories, like the fans liked them, but they didn't believe them. But it was part of the whole kind of game of that. But in the scandal tabloids, they were more kind of into revealing his private life, his divorces and affairs and that part. They weren't into revealing who he really was. There are instances when someone just states, like as a fact, yeah, that booming Vladivostok bath in all the movies, like they knew. But they preferred to play the game of no one really knows, and it's so exotic, and there's a palace in Mongolia where he might be from. So I think everyone kind of benefited from that. And of course, I mean, that had to do with the Cold War as well, and the whole kind of geopolitics that were going on. yeah, I mean, but it's like it's an endless topic, like the baldness. There is exactly also this kind of like, where is he from, and he's not like a reliable narrator in any shape or form. And since it's an anal book, I went through lots of those origin stories and the variations of that, where, you know, he says like, oh, Yule, you know, this name, it's ancient Mongolian, it means something beyond the mountains, something you can't see, whereas his grandfather was called Jules, so that's where the name comes from, which is much more boring. I was named after my grandfather, who founded the city of Vladivostok. No, it goes into these completely crazy kind of fabulations.
It wasn't just his characters that were exotic and fabulated on. He was this fabulous exotic figure.
Well, there's a kind of continuity to the star image, I think, exceptionally so. So in a way, he did have a private life, but he kept that private. So the kind of private persona the media would get was like an extension of the same, very knowingly curated. And then there was the person, whoever he eventually was. But there were no sort of like there were interviews with him going into his house, but it was never about the family. And even those interviews going into his house, it was like this: he has such an appetite, he wakes up hungry like a tiger, eats like a beef, cake, pancakes. 2 hours later, he's hungry again, this insatiable energy, insatiable hunger, also kind of sexual appeal. It's sort of hinted upon, it's 50, so they can't say it, but it's implied, you know, that we have this kind of like a throbbing libido of exoticism here. And he completely played that, obviously. Yeah, but I mean, the tabloids worked in a very different way. They were into revealing, let's say, affairs, but they weren't into revealing, because identity, the way that identity was discussed, what it mattered was very different in that context. It wouldn't have sold copies, I think, to point out that he was Russian. But with a Swiss passport, important. Yeah.
About the Cold War, did it affect Spain in some way? Because besides the mystery, it was a little bit clear that he was Russian. So did this did some effect in some way, or did people just forget it and try to not believe that because people liked him? So, oh, he can't be Russian because he's a star, he's sexy, he's everything. So he's not one of them.
I think that would have spoiled the fun, because that would have pinned him down, and you know, having a Russian, Soviet Russian person play the King of Siam or Pharaoh of Egypt, you know, it sort of doesn't, it doesn't quite work. So I think there was this suspension of disbelief. It wouldn't have been difficult to figure out his life story at all, since her sister made no secret of it, for example. So I think there was like this unwillingness to go in that direction. And he did refuse. He was scheduled to play Stalin, and he refused because he didn't, you know, he was fine playing unpleasant characters, but that was personal because of his family history. There's a movie that was gossiped to be made where he would have played a Soviet ballet dancer who has a relationship. I mean, the romantic female lead would have been either Audrey Hepburn or Katharine Hepburn, same. There are gossips of both, but it would have been this Cold War romance of him escaping, you know, from behind the Iron Curtain to find love in Rome. That was never made. I mean, him as a Soviet ballet dancer, I mean, I'm kind of sad the film was never made. But I think one of the reasons it was never made is that he wanted to limit how many Russian roles he would play. So they actually were like 5 in his career, although Taras Bulba is technically Ukrainian. But I mean, in that Hollywood imaginary, it's all the same. Shot in Argentina, that movie. It's a very authentic take on that. So I think there was this balancing, like you could have a Russian role here and there, but if you did 3 in a row, then that would signify something.
So he did it kind of thinking, he thought of the possibility that he could be caught
Yeah.
in some way.
Or just fixed. I think it's without having access to what he thought. I mean, from what he did and the choices he made, it was quite clear that he didn't want to be, fixed, because he was fixed into exotic roles, but he didn't want to be fixed into Russian roles, which happened to many other actors who then didn't have a proper career. And him moving into the Western terrain, with the Magnificent Seven, which is, of course, a remake of The Seven Samurai, that was not a project that people believed in. And also, like Yul Brynner in a Western, like that makes no sense because it's such an American genre. Of course, he has his Russian accent and he doesn't speak much. But in terms of the kind of performance of masculinity, it is a continuum. But there was a whole debate about, you can't have this, like the Western. That was a big leap in terms of the American public. Yeah, but I mean, it's interesting because I was really wondering about his Russianness and how it was visible or was not visible. But there are moments when it's obvious, and then that people knew, and then at other time they just go for the whole mythology of maybe growing up in Japan, maybe China, maybe somewhere else.
There is this dimension of this representation that is very strong, like the faraó, and then that persists in time. But I was also thinking about seeing the scenes, and it's a small part of the scenes. And I don't know if I know so much the classical Hollywood cinema, but he looks like, in an interesting way, like a strange body in the Hollywood cinema. And I was thinking if your research was in some ways trying to study how, if this is really the case, like there is something strange in a political way in the way he makes his acting and the way he puts his body and all that, like going away from one way to see masculinity. There is something going on there, like we were saying, beneath, and not just beneath, like in the surface, really. Beneath because it is in the surface. And then I was thinking, if in your research, there is some dimension of how this affects the viewers of that time in the journals, if that was possible to see. How did it feel like to see this body that seems a little bit different from the others, like in a very interesting and political way in the 50s and the 60s?
I mean, in the magazines, you don't get the fans speak that much. You get these anonymous voices that are quoted about his appeal, and it's basically, I think these are fictitious people who are made to sort of say things. So basically the voices, which I think are fictitious voices of the fans, they become part of this narrative about sex appeal, and the women lose all bodily force and they are mesmerized by his tiger eyes or whatever you might have. So that's what we get. And he had like a fandom, but it wasn't like this teen fandom, because he was in his 30s when he became a star. But I think one way maybe to think about the particular excessive aesthetics of his performance is to think like his background on Broadway and in Broadway musicals. So I think that sensibility is really kind of, it's even in the Westerns you get that certain kind of je ne sais quoi, like there's like excess to it, for me at least. I mean, he had some training as an actor, but I wouldn't say. There's like, he was in The Sound and the Fury, which is like it's a drama. And there are reasons why he didn't make too many like dramas, because there are limitations to what he could do as a performer. So in a way, I mean, he would stick to these, bastard with a heart of gold roles, but he would also stick to roles that didn't demand much in terms of like posturing. It's like easy money, especially from the 60s onwards. It's kind of clear what was happening there. He was not like someone with a great artistic ambition, at least not in the 60s when he started making money and he realized there's like a sweet life to be had. So, yeah. One of the reasons why he's forgotten, he's not part of any canon, is that he really made horrible movies. They really are quite, yeah. Yeah, my friend was feeding my fetish and actually downloaded most of his films. I mean, I had some on thumb drives, and I was like, oh, thank you, what am I going to do with this? And then they became handy. And they were all emptied in X-ray. I was coming back from Australia, and suddenly there was nothing on those USB drives. And my friend was like, oh, do you want me to download the stuff again? No, I'm good. I don't think I need to have access to this. Yeah.
Mais alguma questão, gente? Então, acho que a gente pode encerrar. Thank you, Susanna, very much.
Thank you for coming. Yay!